Thank you so much for everyone for coming out late on a Saturday for getting started with Tabletop RPGs, a step-by-step guide to the best game night you've ever had. I am your host, Jeff Stormer. I am a tabletop podcaster. I host and co-produce a podcast called Party of One with my partner. We produce a podcast, an actual play focused on two-player role-playing experiences. We've been doing that for about 3 years. I also co-host and produce a podcast called All My Fantasy Children, which is tabletop character creation done live on the air every week. We take a listener prompt and we make a tabletop character. I also am a game designer. I made a game called, most notably the thing that I made is a game called When You're Here, Your Family, which is a LARP designed to be played at an Olive Garden during its unlimited soup, salad, and breadsticks promotion. It got picked up by Kotaku, and it's real weird that that's my thing now, but I have to own that. I'm also producing a game called Mission Accomplished. There's a salute in the title and a colon, and I haven't figured out how to express that via my voice yet. That will be coming in 2019. It's a game about super spies and office meetings. And most importantly to this panel, I've been playing role-playing games for a really, really long time. Like, I started when I was about 10 years old. I found a copy of Middle-earth role-playing at a yard sale. And my brothers and I tried to play it, and it turns out 20 years later, I'm still not really sure how that game works, but I'm getting there. I'm getting closer every year. I figure by 50, I'll have it down. So it's a really super exciting time for role-playing games. They are on the world stage in a way that they've maybe never been before. Certainly not in decades. You know, we have celebrities talking about Dungeons and Dragons. We have shows like Stranger Things and Community featuring them in a prominent way. We have podcasts like Critical Role and Adventure Zone and One Shot featuring them for hundreds of thousands and millions of people. It is super exciting, and hearing all of this and seeing all of this, it makes you want to play it. It makes you want to do the thing, to be a part of the role-playing game thing. So the question is, how do you do it? How do you D&D? That is what I am here for. Step 1, picking the game. This is the longest part of the presentation because it is probably for me the most important part. Maybe second, probably in the top 3. It is picking the right game can make and break everything. A personal example, I played in a 3rd edition Dungeons & Dragons game with my friends. These were friends that I've had since high school. We went through high school together, we went through college together, we were adults, and I played this game. I almost walked away thinking I did not like role-playing games. Like, the experience didn't click for me, and a lot of that was I was just playing a game I didn't like. And now I'm 3 years into making an actual play podcast and writing games, and I'm like, that's ridiculous that I ever thought that, but, like, playing a game you don't like can lead you to be being like, I don't think this is for me, and I don't want you to have that experience, so I want you to think about picking the right game, which brings us to the elephant in the room, or I should say the dragon in the room. I want to talk about a little game you may have heard of called Dungeons and Dragons. I like Dungeons and Dragons. I really do. I think it's a very good game. I think there's a lot of pros and cons to it. I think there's a lot of good stuff about it, but there are also some drawbacks, some very specific drawbacks to it that it might not be the game for you. Some pros are, you're familiar with it. Everyone is familiar with it. If you've played a video game in my lifetime, you are familiar with concepts like leveling up, experience points, classes, upgrades, all things that came from Dungeons and Dragons. You're going to look at them and go, oh yeah, I get that. It's like every video game that I've played now has all of these things that they took from Dungeons and Dragons. So you're familiar with it. It is also iconic. You know what to expect. It's D&D. When we talk about role-playing games, the term we often use is we're playing D&D. It is the thing. You know, and there's a value to, I was putting together a game with coworkers once. And I was like, what do you want to play? Do you want to play like Fate? Like, and they're like, we want to do D&D. And I'm like, okay, cool. Like, are you interested in we want to do D&D. So there's a value in that name recognition and that, like, conjuring the things you think of when you think that. D&D has that. The other thing that I think is really important and really like positive thing about D&D is that it is a game. So if you are curious about entering role-playing, D&D has a lot of concrete rules to tell you, like, this is what happens when you attack an orc. This is what happens. These are the steps that you take. And for somebody who is not comfortable with that process, that is hugely important. And I think that plays a really vital role that I think gets brushed aside sometimes, including by me, is that there's a value in, like, oh, okay, now I've learned the processes, and now I can kind of learn how to break them. That said, there are some challenges that I want to go into. The biggest one for me is it's kind of a narrow game. I preface this by saying don't at me. Do not at me under any circumstances. But it is kind of a narrow game. It is a fantasy game about going into dungeons being kind of vaguely defined, fighting things, accruing power, and using that power. Like, it is a very narrow scope. And there are people that can say, like, oh, well, you can do anything with those rules. And they're right, but the rule book, there's 200 pages of combat rules. Like, the rule book bears out that it is a game about very specific things. And those things might not be things that interest you. And if they're not, you might be better off going to another game. If what you want is a game about, like, space politics, you might not want D&D, and that's perfectly fine. It's also more on the complex side, along the lines of saying, like, it is a game, and that is great. It's also a game, and that can be intimidating. It can also lead to you feeling like you're doing it wrong. I promise you're not, because there's no such thing as doing it wrong in role-playing games. But you can feel like, I don't know if I remember the rules for underwater mounted combat. I'll see what I can do. Exactly. Like, and that's another good point, is that it's also very swingy. Like, it is built on the swingiest dice that you can get, and that is difficult for storytelling sometimes. Like, it's easy to say, oh, I rolled a 1 or I rolled a 20, but, like, what does a 4 mean? What does a 17 mean? Like, it is built on this very nebulous, often very binary things, like success system, that can create challenges. It's great for teaching you concepts about games, but it can be challenging. The nice consolation, though, like, D&D might not be for you, but the nice consolation is there are so many role-playing games. These are all role-playing games. They're all different books, and that is amazing. It can be hard to find the right game, because there's not really, like, a central place where you can go and say, like, okay, I want to find a game. Where do I find it? There's Drive-Thru-RPG, which is a shopping site, and it is the sort of most definitive source of finding role-playing games. It's late. I can be honest. Their search function fucking sucks. It's garbage. You can't sort by player number. You can't really sort by... It's full of, like, paper miniatures and maps, and it's so much. I have all the respect for it in the world as, like, an industry-leading thing where I can find all of the role-playing games in the world if I am linked to it on Twitter, but I really wish it had a better search. Like Itch.io, which has a much smaller selection of games, but a much better search. It is easier to find things, but there are fewer things to find. It all kind of balances out. For me, the two best places to actually find role-playing games is either on Twitter, like I said, social media, follow designers, follow game players, follow things like that, and just find the things they're talking about. At people. I know I said don't at me earlier, but at me about this. Don't at me about, like, D&D can actually be used for spaceship comp. At me about, like, hey, I want to play this game. What do you recommend? Because I love that shit. I'm all about those things. Or listening to actual play podcasts. I think they're a great resource. They're not necessarily the best picture of play, but there are a lot of them, and they spotlight a lot of games. Like, One Shot is a spectacular thing. One Shot Spectacular. Party of One is a thing that I make that is also very good. I was on One Shot one time. That was great. Yeah, like, actual play podcasts are a great resource for finding things. And Twitter is a great resource for finding things. Hopefully one day we have a better way to search for them. But in the meantime, if you ever want me to recommend a role-playing game, just ask, and I will probably, if not immediately know, I'll find you something eventually. I make you that promise for being in this room tonight. Okay, so you found the game that you want. Next up is pregame prep. Doing the stuff beforehand so that your game is as seamless as possible. Session zeros are a big thing. They've emerged in the last few years. They come from a game called Apocalypse World, which makes a big deal of it. Basically, what a session zero is talking about the game before you play the game. It is a discussion about, like, between every player, and I include the GM as a player here because you are an equal participant in the story being told. Basically covering what's about to happen. It can happen in the same night that you play the game. It can be a separate, dedicated night. But it is basically sitting down at a table and saying, okay, what are we doing here? What kind of game are we playing? What game are we playing? What characters are we playing? What are we trying to avoid in the game? What are we specifically looking to experience? Bringing those things up front makes the game better because now you're able to be like, okay, cool, this is going to be like a survival horror game. Joe really wants to like feature kind of like a prison escape subplot, so we'll work that in. You're able to create an experience that's like, oh, this was exactly what I wanted, instead of like, that was kind of what I wanted, but like kind of didn't want to play survival horror. We've all heard the story of like 6 players have come to a table expecting an intense horror game, and one person comes with The Punisher. If you have a session zero, you can be like, well, I want to play The Punisher. Okay, but we all want to do survival horror. Okay, I can kind of like work that concept. What if I was like limited, or like I was really playing with being unhinged? When then suddenly you like everyone meets in the middle ground, as opposed to like, okay, cool, we've all got like underpowered cops and we're on our last day of duty. Yeah, I roll up in my tank. They're great. Okay, cool. Thanks, buddy. And like session zeros are really important for that. I think they help make the game more seamless, and it's taking that little bit of work up front, and you know, it's, what's the phrase about like a pound in the bush or whatever, a hand in the hand, whatever. It's doing a little work up front and paying off extreme dividends later. Some games have it built in. I know like Fiasco basically sits you down and says, this is what this game is about. This is what you're going to play. This is the content you're going to deal with. Are you cool with that? Great. Now we're going to make characters and you're going to build the world together. Some games have it built in. Some games it's a separate discussion that you're having. D&D, for example, it's a separate thing before you make characters and build a world of like, all right, what are we doing here tonight, guys? Cool. This brings us to when I said like picking a game might be second most important, this brings us to the most important thing, and that is safety mechanics. Let's talk about being safe. Safety mechanics are super important because role-playing is intense, emotional, empathetic. Even when it's silly, you are being vulnerable and making a thing in the moment, and that can be challenging. Everyone should be safe at the table. Everyone should feel comfortable at the table. Everyone should have fun. This is a fun, cool thing. Safety mechanics help make that happen so that nobody walks away uncomfortable, hurt, or worse. A few examples of safety mechanics and how they work. The X card is kind of the iconic safety example. What the X card is an index card with a big red X on it, or black X, or whatever. You slap it in the middle of the table. Say we're playing a game. I personally am extremely uncomfortable with eye-related injuries. They are a thing that I don't like. If somebody starts talking about jamming a stick in someone's eye, I can tap that X card and say, I don't want to go into that. I'd rather not we talk about eye injuries. We all agree at the table when the X card comes down, if somebody taps that, I don't have to explain it. I don't have to tell you what the deal is. If I say, like, I'm X-carding women named Melissa, we kind of just accept, okay, we're going to rename that character because that's something about that Jeff doesn't want to deal with. It is basically an agreement that, like, we are not going to cross anyone's boundaries. We are not going to make anyone uncomfortable. This is also the same basic concept of Script Change by Bree Sheldon. It is an idea that you have certain buttons on the table. Like, I want to fast forward through this. I don't really want to go into this eye injury stuff. Can we fast forward through this? Can we rewind and kind of take something a different way? Can we kind of slow down and like talk about what's happening thematically here? The safety flower is the same basic idea. You can kind of see that it's a bunch of like red circles or red petals, yellow petals, and green petals. Each one represents like kind of a different emotion. Like there's, yes, I want more of this. So if you excitedly tap that spot on the flower, it says, okay, cool, we're really going to lean into this. If I tap the yellow, can we kind of speed this along? You move along the process. The other one that I want to talk about is lines and veils. Basically, this is a safety mechanic that says, up front, when we sit down at the table, I say I am drawing a hard line on eye-related injuries. They're not coming up. I don't want them to come up. We all agree on that. Or I can say, I don't mind eye stuff, but like if we can put a veil on it and just be like, oh, it's an eye injury. Cool. He's wearing an eye patch now. We put a veil on it, and you kind of approach it from a distance. They're valuable things. It's all just basically talking over the stuff that you want to see in play and don't want to see in play, so that you can come to step 3 and play the damn game. This is ironically the shortest part of the presentation.
Someone who might be under 18 here.
My bad. My bad. That's why I said darn. Darn game, see? Yeah.
Oh yeah, you were in that same chair.
You've heard cussing. General role-playing advice here. I've got a little bit of general advice that I can go into, but like this is kind of the easy part. If you want to go next. Be enthusiastic both as a player and a game master. Yes and things, right? Like be excited. You're not, the GM is not doing all of the work for you. Be there for them and be like, okay, cool, what can I contribute? Everyone is at the table equally. Everyone is an equal participant. Make that happen together. Let's see, what else did I write down? Manage your fun and help manage your friends' fun. If I say, like, I really wanted to do, like, I wanted to explore the feeling of, like, stopping like an institutional evil, you can definitely be like, as another player, be like, what if we confronted the king about this? That would kind of be cool, because I also know that that's something that the other players at the table said they wanted to do. But and at the same time, like, you be like, if I want to do that, be like, I think that we should go confront the king because I really want to do that. Be upfront about the stuff that you want, because I think that makes it easier to include the stuff that you want. We don't know what you want to talk about if you don't bring it up, and so talk about it. Again, which ties into say what you want and work to make it happen, right? Like, say the things that you want to happen and make those things happen. Also, acknowledge that no two groups are the same, and the stuff that I'm saying might not work for your group, but by playing, you will figure those things out. Maybe you don't feel as strongly about safety mechanics as I do. Maybe you feel like we should try to just discover what we all want on the fly. Those are valid. Groups are going to change. Also, don't be that guy. We all know what that means. Just don't be that guy. Maybe shower before you come to your game. That would be nice. We would all appreciate that. Don't be a racist. Don't be that guy. When I'm saying that, there's a lot of things that fall into that, but it's maybe the most important thing I want you to take away from this is just don't be that guy. Just in general, I think is also valid. I do have some resources about, like, playing better. There was just a book Monty Cook Games published on Kickstarter called Your Best Game Ever. It is a collection of essays about, like, how to be a proactive player, what it means to engage these things. It is a great resource. It just funded and made a bunch of money, and I'm really excited to see it happen. It's not out yet, but it's going to be great. Podcasts, there are a lot of great podcasts about, like, the art of play and, like, the process of playing. I think they're really valuable, and I think you can listen to them and kind of get a good handle on, like, best practices. That's where a lot of this came from, was me listening to other podcasts and going, oh, that's really good. I'm going to make a note of that later. And now I'm just giving it back to you. Actual play is good, but I always give the caveat that, like, you're listening to trained performers perform. It's never going to be the most accurate picture of play. Keep that in mind, but listen to it and go, oh, I can see how they're being really enthusiastic and cool, partially because they're on mic and they're doing that specifically. It also can be heavily edited. I know Party of One, we edit the hell out of it. So what you're hearing might not be the most accurate picture of what is actually at the table.
Depending on the game of the players, they might also be breaking the rules.
They might also be breaking rules for, like, the story's sake. I know I do that a lot. Last part of the process is after you've played the game. You've done the cool thing. Burgers and milkshakes encouraged, but not required. But come on, you at least make me a nice milkshake. Talk out the game after you've played it. Figure out what you liked and what you didn't. so you can make next time even better. A great way to do that is a practice called Rosebud and Thorn. A rose, basically, you take, every player states 3 things. The rose, something in the game, whether it be like a particular moment, a particular exchange, an encounter, something that like jazzed you the heck up. Something that was your favorite thing in the game. The thing that you walked away like, oh, I really want more of that. A bud, something that you were like, okay, I'm interested in that. I want to explore more of that later. And a thorn, the one thing that like frustrated you or kind of bothered you or didn't sit right with you or like, pricked you. Like the thing that frustrated you. Be specific in these things, be forthcoming, be honest. There's no reason to hold back. Like if you're all friends and you're being respectful about it, be upfront and be like, yeah, I really didn't, that thing with the mummy just didn't really land for me. Like I'm not really afraid of mummies and it was a big horror thing. So like could we not go down that road in the future? Like it wasn't bad. It just wasn't my thing. Talk about that stuff. Or if like you were like, oh my god, the thing with the mummy was the scariest thing in the world. I've been thinking about it since it came up, and it came up in the first hour of the game. I so want more of that. Then your next session is just going to be better by default because you're going to have those things. And that's what friends do. Friends talk about stuff. This is also a great time to like, if another player at the table, if you're like, oh man, Joe, listen, the part where you grabbed the mummy's gauntlet and you put it on because you were like, this is the only way that I'm going to save the team is by making this sacrifice. Beautiful. Art. Fantastic. This is a great time to do that. And which is great because like, it's like, okay, cool. I now feel empowered for next time to make more of those decisions and do more of those things because I got a compliment, and compliments are nice and they make us feel good and they make us want to do more of those things. It's how our brains are wired. And this is also a good time to address problems head on. Don't be that guy, but also don't be the group that tries to handle that guy with kid gloves. If somebody at your group is being a problem player, can I tell you how many times I've seen someone ask the question of like, so-and-so is being really rude and they're combative and they're making like sexist comments. Should we like punish them in the game for this? What is the best thing? And it's like, no, you pull them aside and say, stop being a jerk. Stop being a jerk or you're not invited to game night anymore, Greg. It's like, oh, I didn't realize I feel terrible now. But stop it. Yeah, like pull him aside and be like, stop being a jerk. Brian, your name's not Brian, is it? I took a stab in the dark. I realized it could have bitten me twice. Yeah, because, like, you can be like, well, we're going to punish you in the game and dock your experience. Or you can be an adult and say, like, you're causing a problem, and if we don't want you to cause problems, we will kick you out. Because maybe that person just doesn't know, and this is a learning opportunity. Or maybe they do, and that's a toxic thing in your game that you can cut. It's okay to kick people out of your game. That's a thing I wanted you to take away from this. And, do I have anything else? Yeah, don't be the group that is, like, trying to handle this with kid gloves. And that all leads to step 5. Just do it all again. Plan your next game. You've done it. You played D&D, and it was great. It was your best game night ever, and now you get to start the next one. And the next one's going to be a little better, and the next one after that's going to be a little bit better. I really like role-playing games, and I want you to love role-playing games the way that I love them. Anybody have any questions, comments, complaints?
Safety features.
Yes.
Is that just common rule sets, or were you inspired by, because, like, I saw all but one of those on the recent electronic version of the new Masquerade.
Mm-hmm. A lot of those are kind of common practice. I know the X card is pretty much everywhere. The other one's a little bit less so. I know Masquerade, like, the people writing the safety section of that were, like, heavy into, like, LARP design, and so a lot of that stuff, they were very knowledgeable about it.
That appendix is a LARPer.
Yeah. And so, like, a lot of those are kind of common practice. You'll see some variation of them in most games nowadays. I think, like, Worldwide Wrestling has you throw an X as though someone is injured because it's like, oh, I'm not cool with that. I'm throwing the X. But, like, they're pretty common practices. Some of them are a little less known than others. Like, script change isn't the most prominent, but, like...
Yeah,
The flower I picked up from Metatopia. It was in like a packet of safety tools, and they were like, here, this is a thing that you can put on the table, and I was like, this is the coolest one ever.
Flower with in regards to green, yellow,
Yeah.
red, especially like green, more of this, was mentioned in the appendix.
That's awesome. It makes me really happy.
But yeah, a lot of like card things of like, okay, point to this. And
Yeah.
affirmative of like, hey, I appreciate where this is going. He's also a nice counter.
Yeah. And that's the thing.
Players might find it kind of aggressive of like, we want to like stop this core stuff, but like a lot of people have like, you know, even if they don't like to admit it, like a thing.
Yeah.
Might have a thing against. So yeah, being just compassionate to each other.
Yeah, and it's just like, it's compassion. It is really just like, oh, you're not comfortable with this? I'm not going to shove this in your face.
Instead of it happens, fade to black.
Yeah.
And what I like about the green, yellow, red is that it really tries to emphasize, let's do more of this and not just let's do
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a both thing, yeah.
And the great thing about it is, if you look at it, I wish I had a larger version of it, but like if you look at the flower, there's actually several different greens and yellows. There's like, yes, I want more of this, or like, yes, let's stay in this for longer. Like there's different variations, so you can be like, oh yeah, no, I really want, like, this scene is cool, I want to draw this out. And there's also like, oh, I just kind of want more of this in the future. If we can make this more present, like, that's awesome. And it's also like, yellow, I'm not feeling this right now, but like I don't want to like take it off the table. Or like, yellow, let's end this scene because it's making me uncomfortable, but like we don't necessarily need to like hard stop. Or this is just getting a little intense, so after this scene, let's take a breather. There's different kind of approaches, and you can kind of like be like, hey, I'd love this. Let's draw this scene out. Which is one of the things I really like about the flower, and I'm really excited that I got to that. Like, it's a thing that people are putting in books now. Anybody have any other questions?
There's another one, but I can't remember from the slides.
That sounds like a you problem, my friend. Yeah, if anybody wants to, I think I have one more slide for plugs. Yes, I do. Got some plugs. Oh, I don't have tomorrow. I have a show tomorrow. We're doing Party of One live. +2 Comedies. Noah Houlihan is my guest. It's going to be good. It's going to be some good wacky fun. We're playing a murder game show themed game of a game called Roll for Shoes, which is a very lightweight, silly story game. It's a lot of fun. I'm really excited about it. You can find me on Twitter at Party of One Pod. At me asking for game recommendations. I love recommending games for people. It is one of my favorite things. Yeah, and I also host All My Fantasy Children at allmyfantasychildren.com, partyofonepodcast.com. You can find all of the things that I do. And that's kind of all I've got. If anybody else has any questions, great. Yeah.
One shot. You said you were on an episode?
Yes, I was on an episode. We played Scoundrel of the Deep. It was a game that played with a book of matches. It's a 2-player game, book of matches. You light the matches, and you hold it and try to solve a challenge. Love that game. It's a good game. Are you just realizing that you listened to that episode?
No.
Oh, all right. You should go listen to that episode. It's a good game.
But I did listen to the one that made me think your 2-player game, but more like 3. Of 2 players fighting over a similar.
Oh, yeah. Shooting the Moon. Yeah, that's a good. Yep. That's a good game. Yeah. Oh, man, I really love... I mentioned it a little bit, but, like, at this exact moment, it might be a game called Worldwide Wrestling, which is a professional wrestling role-playing game. It's great because it is not like you're going to play wrestlers fighting it out. It is specifically you are going to play a group of professional wrestlers putting on a professional wrestling show. So creative is going to say to you, hey, you're going over in this match. Make the other person look as good as possible. You're going over. You're losing in this match, but the story is you're going to lose because this person's going to do a run-in, and the group puts together a wrestling show, and it kind of highlights the fact that role-playing games can be about anything, and it highlights the fact that like there's this beauty. It also highlights the fact that wrestling and role-playing games are kind of the same thing, which I also really like. It's another panel that I want to do one day, is wrestling and role-playing games are the same thing. Hot take, the panel. I really like Worldwide Wrestling. I like Powered by the Apocalypse games a lot, like Apocalypse World, Worldwide Wrestling, Monster Hearts. They kind of scratch a very specific like story-first itch that I have. I really like those games.
Is Worldwide Wrestling?
Worldwide Wrestling.
Is that in a similar vein as Apocalypse?
It is the same system. It's Powered by the Apocalypse.
Did not know
Yes, it is professional wrestling powered by the Apocalypse by Nathan D. Paletta. It's a great game.
Interesting that it's Friends 3 actual, like, creative team is making
Yeah.
because I've always wanted to do, like, wrestling, but treat it as real.
Yeah. And
So, like, all the, like, petty backstab and all
this is great because like a lot of the stuff in it is like you fill out your backstage history and it's like, yeah, you beat me up when I was a young boy and now I kind of resent that because you stiffed me. And it's amazing because I've played it with people who have never watched a minute of wrestling in their lives, and I've played it with people who are professional have been in professional wrestling matches. And who have never played a game before. And both of those people, and like the end result is everybody comes to it understanding role-playing games, and the people who have never watched wrestling come to it with like, they tell stories that I'm like, yeah, that's how wrestling, like that's wrestling, and it's amazing. It's an amazing game. Of course. The other game that I want to recommend that I offhandedly really like is a game called Paranoia. I love Paranoia a lot. I love Paranoia.
Good for a first game, or like would the GM need to kind of?
I think it's probably not a great. It might be a great. I mean, I guess it depends on like what you're into, but I think it does play on a lot of RPG assumptions in a way that might not be conducive for a first time game. But I just genuinely like that game a lot.
Its fans are really strong.
I'm a big fan of that game.
If I'm correct from what my dad has told me, like the person in charge is the AI.
Yeah. So the premise is.
It's also like when you first are making your characters and whatnot, you like basically just go and have like an interview.
Yeah.
You never meet with all your friends.
That is correct.
Why are you not smiling?
Why are you not smiling? It's treasonous to not smile. Friend computer expects you to be happy. That's why.
Termination.
It does. It is ground for termination. It is ground for, having your brain bleached. So thank you all for coming. I think that's all I've got. If anybody else has questions, the computer has gone to sleep, which means I think it's time for all of us to go to sleep. Thank you all so much for coming.